really is life after death, a wonderful life after death, and that's for all of us. We have overwhelming evidence for the reality of near-death experience. People often call it a heavenly realm. I think that helps identify how beautiful and wondrous and unearthly it is. The great majority of people having a near-death experience, even though their loved ones, everything they knew was in their earthly life, the great majority do not want to return. People during their near-death experience became aware of or actually encountered, interacted with God. Over and over will say, I thought I'd be judged. I thought I was in trouble. And yet, in spite of their wrinkles and faults, they are loved with that level of profoundness. There are a few frightening, even hellish near-death experiences. A hellish NDE could absolutely be the product of an overwhelming, loving, and compassionate God if that was the experience that they most needed to go live the rest of their life in love and compassion. We're really eternal soul beings having an earthly life. The afterlife is non-physical. We actually chose to have our earthly incarnation. They're not only aware of their prior life, but here's where it gets very interesting. There's many different lines all converging on evidence proving that, to my satisfaction anyway, that there really is life after death, a wonderful life after death, and that's for all of us. So you want to pick just one of them? Okay. I interviewed Vicky. Vicky was born totally blind. And yet, during her near death experience, she was involved in a bad car wreck. And for the viewers that are scratching their heads, no, she was not driving. She was a singer professionally at a tavern. And unfortunately, an inebriated patron was trying to get her home. So, boom, the car crashed. First time in her life she had vision was out of body, consciousness apart from the body and up above herself. She was initially just horrified because vision was a completely new sense to her. Went on to describe a very vivid visual near-death experience with all the bells and whistles. In her experience, like many other near-death experiencers described, she had what we call 360-degree vision. She could simultaneously see in front, back, right, left, up, down, technically spherical, if you will, vision. In fact, when I told her that everybody else in the world that has normal vision, we have like pie-shaped visual fields because of where our eyes are located in our head, she laughed at me because, don't forget, her entire life experience was spherical vision. So yeah, we actually have a series now of, probably we're up to about 12 or 15, where we directly asked people and found that at the time of their near-death experience, they either had severe visual impairment or were legally blind. And yet in every one of these, their vision, what they saw during the near-death experience, was either absolutely normal in comparison to earthly vision or supernormal, as it was with Vicky. So how's that for starting out with some strong evidence?
Whoa! It's also really intriguing because you'd think every individual lives such an individual life. It feels like for the individual anyway. But yet you're saying there's did I hear correctly? There's 12 sort of universal sort of things that happen to NDEs as they're transitioning on. So even though you run a very bespoke life, there are some system like I don't want to say systemic, but there are quite some universal steps that you go through in the process of
Yeah.
experiencing an NDE.
Yes and no. When you study large numbers of near-death experiences, you see a number of what we call characteristics or elements, what occurs during the near-death experience that occur and generally in consistent order. So that's the nature of near-death experience. And yet, no two near-death experiences are the same. And in fact, it's relatively rare that they have all the characteristics that have been described in near-death experiences. So again, that's yet another line of evidence for the reality of near-death experience all around the world. Adults, children, whatever their prior belief system was or lack of belief, if they have a near-death experience, it's generally going to follow some very characteristic and well-defined pattern in terms of what happens.
Can you share them with us?
Sure. Again, no two near-death experience. I may slip and call them NDEs. That's a near-death experience abbreviated. But very commonly, there's that life-threatening event, near death. They're unconscious or maybe clinically dead with an absent heartbeat. So at that time, by the very dictionary definition of unconscious, you shouldn't have any experience memory at all. They do, and that is the experience part of a near-death experience. A common first thing that happens is, like Vicky I just described, consciousness separates from the body, typically rising above the body. They can often observe their unconscious or comatose body down below, and they can often visualize the frantic efforts of other people trying to resuscitate them and bring them back to life. So after that, a common element is to travel into or through a tunnel. Often at the end of the tunnel, there's a beautiful, unearthly, mystical light. Once they pass into that light, they're in an unearthly realm. And people often call it a heavenly realm. I think that helps identify how beautiful and wondrous and unearthly it is. So I think that's probably the best English language word we have. But in this unearthly realm, there can be encounters with deceased loved ones. These are joyous reunions, and that includes pets, deceased pets, by the way, for you pet lovers. But there can be landscapes, beautiful buildings, and they may describe hearing music that's beautiful beyond anything possible on earth. Flowers have been described with colors so beautiful that they do not exist on earth. They are so beautiful. Around this time, they may have a life review. They may review part or even all of their prior life. I mean, let that sink in. They've typically been alive for decades, and yet, boom, that's how fast their consciousness is going. Around this time, even though they were in the throes often of agony of that life threatening event, they don't feel that anymore. There's no pain, no misery. They feel typically an overwhelming sense of peace. And in fact, the two most common words used by people having a near death experience to describe what happened is love and peace. So it's felt that deeply and again, unearthly off the scale. Sometimes near death experiencers are given a choice by other spiritual beings about whether to return to that earthly life or to stay in this unearthly heavenly realm. Okay, here's where it gets very interesting. The great majority of people having a near death experience, even though their friends, family, loved ones, everything they knew for their entire life was in their physical body and their earthly life, the great majority do not want to return to their earthly life. Why? Very easy. They feel overwhelming sense of peace and love. They feel connected to everything and everyone around them in their near death experience. And they often say that what they're feeling when they're in that unearthly realm is a strong sense of familiarity. There's beings, even if they can't identify them, seem familiar. So that is absolutely, an amazing and yet, if you will, another line of evidence for the reality of near-death experience. That's how compelling and how powerful these experiences are for those that are having it. When they ultimately do make that decision, or more often are involuntarily sent back to their physical body, when they recover from that close brush with death, they've got their near-death experience to share.
Wow, thank you so much. There's so many questions that open up
Well,
in
yeah,
that space.
you said a mouthful. I know, where do you start?
Well, one of the
Yeah.
places is, let's start with fear though, because you mentioned love and peace on the other side is this
Mhm.
unanimous, well, unanimous, but consistent experience that people
Yeah.
reflect on. But yet on this side, looking down the barrel, looking down that tunnel with the light on the other side,
Mhm.
we feel not in the actual NDE experience, but here in like living day to day life, so many people have so much fear of
Yeah.
death.
Right.
And yeah, so where do you think like that fear? Why do you think there's so much fear if the others, like if the
Yeah.
actual experience from people having gone through on the other side report back, kind of going, oh, it's kind of amazing, and it's not that we should advocate people wanting to transition across. By the way, massive asterisks in this entire conversation today, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, yeah. What do you think how do you think the fear came about slash the fear lives? And can you explain, unpack that a little bit
Oh,
for us in your experience, especially as a
absolutely.
doctor as well? Sorry. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No question. I mean, it's normal in our earthly life to fear death. We fear crossing that veil, what lies ahead. Is there nothing? We typically fear not only death for ourselves, but for our loved ones. I mean, for those that, and pretty much all of us have had a loved one in our life who's passed on. And you worry about that. Will we ever be together again? Are they okay? Are very common questions. Well, the answer is near death experiences are overwhelmingly consistently carrying the message that when you do cross that veil, when you do the final irreversible death, it's a beautiful afterlife, a wonderful afterlife, and that will be the destiny for each and every one of us. It's just that hasn't sunk in deeply enough to enough people in the world. The fear is overriding the reality of near death experience. Two quick lines of evidence on that. In 2021, there was a survey by Pew Forum, a very reputable survey firm. And in America, 72% surveyed agreed with the statement that a near death experience was an observation of consciousness departing the physical body. And so that defines near death experience. So most people are aware of near death experience and accept it, that there really is. They use consciousness or language other than soul. Other people, you can insert soul in there, but people really get near death experiences, at least most people, intellectually. But to really grasp the near death experience, to really deep down know how profoundly real that information is, that's difficult. You have to, well, heck, you have to listen to podcasts like this. There you go, and that would certainly do it. Or read some good books, or understand the literature. And then I think for the great majority of people that go down that path, boom, they really understand that. But a second very important concept as we address the concept of fear, I just very recently published the largest study of how people's values and beliefs change after a near death experience. We had 834 in our group. And one of the key questions that we looked at was their level of fear of death. And it is absolutely astonishing. After a near death, they were asked to describe their fear of death prior to their near death experience and their fear of death after their near death experience. And for those that had a near death experience, an astounding, I mean, like 80+% drop in their level of fear of death. So having a near death experience is convincing that there's an afterlife, and death is nothing to be feared. Now, interestingly, in this same study, we had 42 people that had a life threatening event but no near death experience. And their reduction in fear was dramatically less than the people that had a near death experience. So, again, it's not that you came close to dying and survived, reduced your fear of death. It's that literal personal experience of what lies beyond death's door in a near death experience that is obviously so convincing to people that there is nothing to fear about death and that there really is an afterlife.
You ask some really intriguing questions of people. The second book, well, not well, I can't say in particular, but for me in particular, just spirituality being such a deep theme that just drives everything. Touchwood for myself personally, and everybody here on this podcast. Asking questions about their relationship with God as well, and watching the shifts in that. Can you unpack a little bit of what you were researching in your second book with God and the afterlife,
Oh,
and the questions you asked there?
you got it. Okay, one of my favorite topics right there. And I'll tell you why. I mean, I started researching near death experience, over several decades ago, as you said. And very quickly, I realized that a non trivial percentage of people during their near death experience became aware of, or actually encountered, interacted with God. Now, as one near death experiencers, well, not one, many of them, many to say that God is an earthly word and cannot begin to do justice to that overwhelming being they encountered during their near death experience, that was loving, majestic, integrated with them in a way that is absolutely beyond language. So I would put that caveat. However, you need a word to describe it, and God is certainly the most popular word that people used with that caveat there. So when people encounter God, appearance can be quite variable, but often described as a beautiful, mystical, unearthly light. Probably the most common thing people describe is that overwhelming sense of love from God. And don't forget, these are sinners. These are people that have done things they're not proud of in their life, and yet here they are. During their earthly life, you think they would be quaking in their boots at having fallen short and sinned, and yet here they're in front of God, and yet uniformly, and this is one of the few things that's just basically all NDEs described. When they're in the presence of God, they feel that overwhelming love, that acceptance for who they are, everything that they are, all that they are, however they've lived their life. I mean, the love is that deep. So, in addition to that, there can be communication, often some fascinating questions people ask God, and God generally gives some answers, which have some profound spiritual content. While they're with God, they may have that life review we talked about, see part or all of their prior life. But when people encounter God, it is profoundly impactful in terms of them sharing their beliefs. I talked about that study I just published very recently. One of the questions was about their belief in God. So again, not surprisingly, people that had a near-death experience, we asked them about their belief in God at the time of their near-death, prior to their near-death experience, and then at the time they shared their near-death experience, and mean an average of about 15 years later, and their belief in God increased 3, 4 times. Again, not surprising because a very high percentage of people during a near death experience do become aware or actually encounter God. And interestingly, in that same study I published, we had the 42 people in the control group that nearly died but didn't have a near death experience, and their belief in God was basically up only a blip, a small percentage compared to people that had a near death experience. So again, every shred of evidence all seems to be and again, God is so consistently described. I mean, these are people that over and over will say, I thought I'd be judged, I thought I was in trouble, I didn't know what I expect from God. Or we've had atheists encounter God, I don't believe in God. And yet uniform with stunning uniformity, people describe God as I've just explained it there. By the way, those that are atheists when they had a near-death experience encounter God, not surprisingly, they're no longer atheists. Just have to say
It's
that was true.
it's
Yes, they
it's so
know
interesting
better.
because even the way I don't want to look at it from like down here and up there because that provides like all these weird sort of connotations. But I'm just going to run with the framework for a moment. From down here, it kind of looks like you know it requires a belief in God. But what I'm hearing is people that go through these NDE transitions, even the word belief is kind of redundant now. It's they have an inner like sense of knowing. It's like I know, like that's and it's interesting because you also from your work, I found this really I don't want to call it disconcerting, but it's kind of like it flips things a little bit because for people that have gone through NDEs, they almost feel like that's more real than being hit. Like, can you describe yeah?
Oh,
Can you describe that? Because that's well,
yeah, there's a couple concepts you just raised there that are important. First of all, you just alluded to something very briefly. When people encounter God, what I don't see in near death experience accounts are, I thought it was God, maybe this was God, possibly. I mean, when they get it, they know. So there's an absolute knowing, just deep down. And don't forget, they're in a realm where they're having accelerated consciousness, so they're actually thinking more clearly, generally, than they ever did during their life. But above and beyond that, yeah, here we are down here, and here we look up at God, and yet, it's amazing that it doesn't seem to make any difference what their prior belief system was. That God that they encounter is overwhelmingly accepting, loving. And that's, believe me, I find that reassuring too. I've done some things I'm not proud of, and yet, it seems that God's love is so overwhelming, and part of that he knows. God, it often is described as knowing us, so it's not like, gosh, God loved me and I felt connected and he was very, delighted, and we had a great talk, and maybe he didn't know about my sins. Oh, yes, God does. So that's another thing is over and over, they say they're known, they're for who they are, everything that they are. And yet, in spite of their wrinkles and faults, they are loved with that level of profoundness. And I've considered that to be an incredibly positive message, literally for all of humanity right there.
you inspired soul. Just want to take a quick second out to thank you all that have subscribed to the podcast. Everything you see around here is powered and empowered by your subscription to this humble channel. Thank you so much for your blessings. And to all of you that are considering subscribing or are watching a first, second, third, fourth video and haven't yet hit subscribe, as I'm saying the word subscribe, the button below that is the subscribe button is lighting up. Please hit the button and hit the bell notification icon. It helps with everything we're doing here to champion positivity, wisdom, and love around the world. Thank you so much in advance for your blessings. And without too much further ado, back to Dr. Jeffrey Long. That's incredible. So I want to venture into asking you, so many people that have transitioned across come back and then they have this experience and they describe it. You've used the word heavenly yourself here today. It makes me wonder, like, have there been like descriptions or experiences of hellish experiences? And if not,
Mhm.
then why do we have such a narrative of hell in the zeitgeist?
Yeah. Okay. There are a few frightening, even hellish near death experiences, and I've done quite a bit of research on that. So, first of all, they're rare, and they're like maybe a percent or two. But second of all, when you have a hellish near death experience, it isn't like they come away in the rest of their life and believing that they are having a threat of a permanent involuntary hell. All near death experience researchers that I know of simply believe that that was something they had to do. And in fact, we've had near death experiencers say, this is the type of experience I needed, that sort of hellish encounter, involvement. That was, I needed a spiritual kick in the pants. And, I needed to have that to confront those issues in my earthly life, anger, resentments, unloving consistently, and sort of to see unloving interactions off the scale in a hellish realm. So many people will come back not afraid that that's their ultimate fate, but aware that that was what they needed. It's fairly common in hellish NDEs that they'll cry out to God or Jesus, and boom, they will then promptly be rescued. And here's another interesting perspective you don't hear from hellish near death experiences that I think is also critical, and that is hellish near death experiences, a realm like that really has to exist if you have free will in the afterlife. And there's going to be that extremely small percentage, mercifully, of spiritual beings who, for whatever reason, are going to ultimately choose to be among those that are evil, demonic, hellish, just like themselves. I mean, think about it. To these hellish, demonic oriented people that are evil, that's their heaven because they're around people like them in that hellish realm. And so that's literally comfortable and familiar to them. But to me, that suggests even in the afterlife, they all have a choice. And it seems to be that a few spiritual beings rarely make that probably series of very bad free will decisions in the afterlife and ultimately end up by their choice in a hellish realm. And then finally, you're going to hear people that have near death experiences say, hell cannot exist in heaven. And that's true. And let me explain that. When people are aware of hellish realms exterior to the hellish realms, when they describe them in near death experiences, almost invariably they're seeing it sort of confined to a specific area. The hellish beings are not interacted with or connected with other beings in the heavenly realms like all the other heavenly beings in heaven are. So there really isn't a hell in heaven because it's a segregated, separated area where people, I guess, the spiritual beings can choose to be among others that are like them and create that hellish realm. So
Oh my god,
that's
the en
and you
yeah.
about that.
The engineer in me starts to wanna look for a Cartesian map of the afterlife now, which I think you've
Yeah,
spent 30 years plus doing. So, the
yeah,
interesting well, one of the very heartening things in there is that free will plays such a large part, not just on this side, but also the other side.
yeah,
And that actually our free will actually determines where we go. And actually, even if you're on the other side and you've landed in a situation, you can always
yeah.
ask out for support and guidance, and you receive it, touch wood, to get to where it is that ultimately your free will wants to take you. And also one of the
Mhm.
things I was sort of picking up there was the people that you said that had those NDE experiences that were, somewhat darker in their nature.
Mhm.
They knew it kind of seems like almost as if they knew that that was a midlife NDE and then it actually
Yeah,
wasn't their end game NDE, and therefore they needed that to sort of come back to earth and then rectify and then potentially
yeah.
live
Yeah,
out.
and
Yeah.
that's an extremely good point. A hellish NDE could absolutely be the product of an overwhelming, loving, and compassionate God if that was the experience that they most needed, the right experience for that person to learn the lessons that they needed to learn to go live the rest of their life in love and compassion and in alignment with the greater truth of the heaven of what goes on in heaven. So yeah, that's the big picture I think of how the near death experiences happen.
Yeah, and I'd love to move further into that heavenly realm. There's a sense of familiarity, Touchwood, that you
Yeah,
described that NDE is explained, and I found that a little bit eerie, if I'm honest with you, through
yeah,
researching
yeah,
your books.
uh,
But it was almost
yeah.
yeah. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
I'm going to tell you an interesting story on that. I was in the movie After Death, which was a documentary about near death experience. That was released last year in about, I don't know, 1,600 theaters. Um, and interestingly, I was at the red carpet event where they were opening the movie. And right at the table I was sitting at were two people that had near death experiences. And for both of them, their spouses were there. And yet, both of these people had near death experiences in which, when they were in that heavenly, blissful realm, they did not, and were very clear, and it's in books that they wrote, they did not want to return to their earthly life. And I was just fascinated about, what here's your spouses. Well, how did you feel about that? And they actually were at peace with that because the spouses there of these two near death experiencers who are very well known, there'd obviously been enough discussion and enough interaction where I should say, it took one of them in particular. It took a long time. So yeah, that's very difficult for the other family members, friends, family, and loved ones to understand that they were wrestling with death, which is frightening enough when you have a family member that has that kind of a close brush with death. But then on top of that, to have a near death experience and not want to return to be among them, that's tough. That's difficult. And yet, these people having near death experiences are simply being honest. They're simply relaying how overwhelmingly powerful that experience in the afterlife was, how familiar it felt, how much love they felt. And they go on to say they knew full well that the people they leave behind in earth, well, heck, this physical earthly existence is literally the very tiniest slice of our eternal existence. So they were able to see that in perspective. And it's, I mean, from our earthly life, we think this is all we are and it's, it lasts forever. No, we're eternal spiritual beings. We're really soul beings, eternal soul beings having an earthly life. So during the near death experience, they're fully aware we will be together with those people I leave behind on earth for eternity and in a far better realm and free of the miseries and disconnects that are so common in life. But that is, I do admit it, for a friend, family, loved one of someone that hears that about the near death experience, that's tough. You just have to understand near death experiences. And we see that a lot. That's not rare, by the way. So it just takes some understanding by their friends, family, and loved ones to really accept they weren't being unloving. They just simply said, knowing that we'd all be back together in eternal bliss.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I if I can just share for a quick sec, I had a friend who, rest in peace, she lost her father recently, but she lost her mother not too long just before that. I think it was about a year, 18 months or 2 years, something like that time frame. And as her father was transitioning, the night he transitioned, um, he was pointing over her brother's shoulder and kind of going, "Oh, your mum's standing there." Touch wood. And it was, and the brother looked over and it's just like, there's no one there. Like, there's actually
Right,
no one there. And he's
right.
like, "No, your mum's there. Like, I can see her." And it was, and it was super eerie, and it was almost like, he'd one foot here, one foot on the other side, touch wood. And that sense of familiarity and loved ones being part of the experience, touch wood.
Uh, I have to address that. These are called deathbed visions, and we have scores and scores of these types of experiences that we've been shared, and we have posted on another one of our sister websites. It's oberf.org. Go there, go look up experiences, deathbed visions. You can read scores of them just like that. What's fascinating is that the person who is dying they tend to be fairly lucid at that time, and essentially almost always whoever they're pointing to or communicating with is indeed a deceased person. And yet, to the person dying, they're the picture of health and they're real. And it's rare that other living people can see that person that the dying person's pointing out. But this is fairly common. It's sort of in the umbrella, or if you will, the spectrum of consciousness that near death experiences is literally a subset. But deathbed visions, not only from our scores of experiences, but it's very good publications on that. And they seem to be very real, valid experiences that often help dramatically putting the dying person at ease that they will soon be with that deceased loved one again uh, that died and that they were apart from in their earthly life. So they're actually beautiful experiences when I read them, not scary at all.
Yeah, that's so intriguing. And at the risk of introducing a thread of vanity into the conversation, in the
Go for it.
afterlife,
Go
but
for it.
in the afterlife, you also,
Uh-huh.
like, everyone's, like you said, a picture of health. Like, you
Uh-huh.
depend, regardless of kind of where
Yeah.
you were at, kind of, God forbid, touch wood, you end up, in a decrepit state when you transition. But
Yeah.
when you're in the afterlife version of you, you're not in that compromised health state. Can you share a little bit
Yeah.
about that from your studies?
Sure. Two lines of analysis on that. First of all, when deceased loved ones, a human pet, are encountered, they're essentially always picture perfect health. And as you alluded to, even if they died of disfiguring elderly age, they essentially always feel young, look younger, and maybe appear decades younger in the near death experience and picture perfect health. Interestingly, in the accounts where they die, there's a loved one, a child that died in early infancy, they may appear many years older as a child. So they essentially always, their picture perfect health, whatever. Oh, I've had people described that they, in near-death experiences, they had amputations during their earthly life. And you see the pattern here, of course. By the time they appear in a near-death experience, they've got all their limbs back. So yeah, that is absolutely how they appear to people that are having near-death experiences. That's the first line. But deeper than that, number two, that doesn't surprise me because it's a little bit of a conceptual thing you have to think about. But the afterlife is not a geographically separate three-dimensional physical world. It is literally, the afterlife is a non-physical world. Time is either radically existent or doesn't exist. There's not communication is essentially always telepathic. It's not physical like we know here. Consciousness is generally greatly accelerated. So we have a number of near-death experiences where they flat out say, "How would you like for me to appear?" So I think in this non-physical realm, there seems to be a whole range of possibilities of the souls that are actually there as to how they can appear to other, especially earthly beings. So, not surprising that they can make that choice, obviously, a loving, compassionate choice to appear as would be most comforting and reassuring to the person having the near death experience.
Hi there, guys. I wanted to take a quick moment just to introduce you to my one-to-one coaching. It's something that I deeply love doing. As you can tell, conscious conversation is such a massive part of my life. And having one-to-one, deep, meaningful conversations with people where I get to show up as your brother or as the coach or as your mentor has been such a gift for me personally, and a gift for lots of the people that I have supported on the journey of living a more spiritually empowered, spiritually powered, spiritually aligned life. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's some examples of people all around the world that have experienced profound transformations through this coaching experience.
Amrit is a fantastic coach.
In a few sessions, he got to a depth that I'd only experienced before working with certain medicines. And
he's gone through a lot of the struggles that you're probably facing. And Amrit's been a really strong, supportive figure in my journey.
In control of myself.
I'm kinder to myself.
I actually have that vision and a purpose.
I do feel like I'm a better version of myself already.
Amazing energy.
He was easy to talk to, which made me easy to trust him.
Working with Amrit at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and really I was bouncing out of bed.
Whenever I get off the calls with Amrit, best money we've ever spent.
I would not recommend him because I don't want everyone to know about him, and then I won't be able to book him. If he gets too busy, I won't get my turn.
I would say absolutely.
There's no way you can work with Amrit for a period of time without being transformed.
So if you're considering him as a coach, do not hesitate, because you won't be disappointed.
Alrighty, so hopefully that's inspiring your evolution onwards and upwards. And if you are so inspired to evolve, you can book in a one-to-one call with me directly at www.amrit.coach/life. And guys, if I can say so myself, I do think this is something quite special. Most people that I see building things online don't really work with people this deeply, this intimately, one-on-one as things start to grow, just because it is so time intensive. And yet I'm so deeply passionate about the transformation that comes from one-to-one coaching that just isn't available anywhere else. It would be my absolute honor and a pleasure to support your spiritual awakening, your spiritual path, your spiritual unfoldment. It is my life's work. I look forward to seeing you in the call. Back to today's podcast. That's so fascinating. I can't help but draw parallels. Do you know the allegory of Plato's cave? Have you come across Plato's caves? The allegory of Plato's cave. He talks about how there's like a
Oh yeah, role play, yeah, with the light, yeah. That's
yeah,
that's a really good.
and it
I
was
love that. I love that. Can you go ahead and share that because it's such a fascinating.
Yeah, well, he talks about how it's interesting. Recently, I never really understood it, and recently I've done a few podcasts like this one in particular as well, and where it started to make a little bit more sense, because he says that there's the world that we see. We're actually just seeing the shadows of the real world behind us, and that's like the light from there is emanating, and we're kind of just seeing certain aspects of it. And I couldn't help but feel is what as you were sharing that potentially. I'll try and string this together. Here we go. In the this podcast meant to feature you and hearing my thoughts. Pardon me. But in the afterlife, we've got potentially this version of us that is like the templated, and he calls it the ideal. Like there's the ideal horse, and then there's a horse that we see in 3D reality here on Earth, right? There's the ideal giraffe, and then there's the giraffe we see here on Earth. Then there's the ideal, and this whole idea of ideal kind of rubbed me up a wrong way for the longest while. But what I'm hearing in today's conversation, this particular juncture, is there's like the templated version of yourself, which is, let's just say the unamputated version of yourself, right?
Yeah.
But then
Mhm.
potentially it came into this human experience bound by time to have
Yeah.
a particular experience, to learn those lessons. And in
Mhm.
that, it ended up, touch wood, amputated to have the necessary lessons to go with that. And I'm saying that kind of off the tongue quite rushedly, and I'm conscious for people that have that existence, it's quite a challenging experience, touch wood. So pardon me for if that's coming across as flippant. But yeah, that templated version of yourself kind of having an experience, but then also,
Mhm.
yeah, just that dynamic between there being the infinite version of yourself, let's call it that,
Yeah.
and then the bound version of yourself to human life. And I think that's also one of the things I wanted to shed light on today in today's conversation is, yeah, because your work started to really flip some things for me, because we feel like, I guess, the ego and the mind only really knows this reality and it's tethered to it, right?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so it feels like this is everything that it knows, and so there is that sort of quaking in the boots of like, oh, like this is going to end, and oh, like it's
Yep.
the end of something. And but in your work, it sort of becomes the other way around, where it's like, actually, and I should let you say this, that
Yeah.
we're actually infinite and eternal, because you mentioned the word eternal before, and we've actually, I don't want to say got bored of that for a sec, but let's just go along with the humble old ego, because it can only digest so much information all at once. It got bored of that to sort of have a human experience that's bound and finite. Can you expand upon that?
Yeah, sure. First of all, you're absolutely right. Every shred of evidence in near death experiences, we are eternal, infinite souls that literally, and we talked about free will. As best I can tell from a huge amount of evidence in near death experiences, we actually chose to have our earthly incarnation. Again, it's free will. And that completely eliminates like the problem of evil. We all knew that before we came here. What the world would be like, but the reason we chose, and don't forget too, when we made that free will choice as souls in the afterlife to come and incarnate in our earthly life, we had vastly more awareness and consciousness, and we knew what we were doing. So the reason we chose that, again, as best I can tell, near death experiencers talk about this a lot, is there's just certain experiences and lessons and things to learn here in our earthly life that you simply can't in the afterlife, where there is no fear, misery, doubt, want, lacking, literally no evil if you choose that. So you could intellectually hear or be aware of other people's experiences, but that's really not the best way to understand those concepts. The best way is to personally experience them, and there's absolutely no way we can experience want, doubt, fear, etc., other than to have an earthly life where we're not aware of that afterlife, who we really are, what we really, where we came from, and where we will ultimately go to. So the lessons seem to be so profoundly important. I mean, why on earth would someone leave heaven? Well, answer, to do exactly what we're doing here, to live, laugh, have fun experiences, very difficult experiences, and to grow as spiritual beings, which obviously are going to help us and impact us for the rest of our eternal existence. So, being here in our earthly life, however difficult, I want to emphasize, is, from all the near death experience evidence, profoundly important. We're here for a reason. We're here for very important reasons. And that's not spelled out for us, by the way. Virtually never is a near death experiencer told, you'll go down there and take this profession. You'll go down there and this will be who you marry. You're down here to make free will choices and to learn from them. So it's, while Earth is often very difficult, all of us have difficulties. Take heart, because in the end, it's all very, very important, and we'll all be that much better in our continued earthly existence life, and have first person experience of that which we cannot have first person experience of in the afterlife.
Dr. Jeffrey, we've discussed choice in quite a few different spaces in this conversation today, and it really rears its head as something quite sacred that, even on the other side, it's actually the mechanism and faculty by which people actively make the choice to come back, and they come back. Or if they, obviously we don't know if they make the choice to stay, because then we don't know. Those guys haven't come back. Touch wood. But you talk about this as being like critical fulcrum or a critical pivot that they make in their journey through the transitioning. And we've discussed the themes of free will here. I'd love for you to just relate, just unpack that, just shed a light on that a little bit brighter, and just kind of go the faculty of choice in the human experience from your eyes.
Right. There's no question that free will is a critical rule, law, goal, if you will, of the universe. Certainly in the afterlife, it is astounding. We have that free will. I mean, there's overwhelming love and compassionate, and yet we are beings that can. We're not, puppets on a string. We are free, far more free than we could possibly be in our earthly life to be all that we want to be. So free will is critical, certainly on Earth too. Over and over, there's awareness of how important it is that we have free will. That helps us to make those. I mean, a free will, make choices, make decisions that really help us to grow spiritually. It's okay to make mistakes because that's how you learn, even if they're big mistakes. It's okay to make the right choices because, again, that can inform our earthly life and it's important. So, free will is just simply in our earthly life, just that critical part of who we are, all that we are, that can help make us the most of our human existence. And that's why it is exceptionally wrong for anybody to infringe on another person's free will, unless there's some profound reasons to do so, because it is so important for all of us to have that freedom down here in our earthly lives.
Just taking a quick second out there, guys, to ask you some questions. So, what are your experiences with NDEs? Have you had, or does someone you know been through an NDE? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below some of the profound experiences, because I'm conscious that a lot of the people tuning into these podcasts are quite profound in their own right as well. So please, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below your own NDE experiences or NDEs of loved ones, or any experiences that you've heard of that have struck a chord with you. And also, if there were any questions that you have of Dr. Jeffrey Long, he'll be back on the podcast in the near future, and I'm happy to ask any questions for you to get answered on the podcast. Please ask those questions below and I will collate them, and hopefully you get your question answered in the next episode. Thank you so much, and without too much further ado, back to the episode. Have you studied any of the similarities between psychedelic experiences and the experiences of NDEs? Is there a parallel, or are they distinctly quite different?
Yeah, that's a fact. I knew that was coming up because it always comes up as a question. And all the people that have gone to podcasts and heard people say, "Whoa," and usually it's DMT. It was very much like a near-death experience. So I will say, and there's some research ongoing, so I don't have the last word on this, but I do feel I need to give it from my perspective. There's no doubt that there are, I think, rare psychotropic, psycho being brain, tropic acting drugs that can cause experiences that are, at least in some way, like near death experiences. I think it's rare that they fully um, cause a full near death experience like event. So here's my three takes on psychotropic drugs related to near death experience. Number one, a few years ago, I co authored a major paper published in the Proceedings of the New York Academy of Sciences. And the part of that paper was to review the scholarly literature about what the true descriptions were of psychotropic drug experiences. I mean, this is scholarly, peer reviewed research, so this seems to be pretty darn accurate. And the conclusion was from that paper is that near death, what happens in a near death experience is substantially different from psychotropic drugs as described in the peer reviewed scholarly literature. So you got that. But number two, if anybody really wants to know the truth about the effects of any psychotropic drug, I invite you to go to an amazing website called Erowid, EROWID.org. You will find literally tens of thousands of people that shared their first person psychotropic experience. So you think DMT is like NDE? All right, go check it out. You can go to that website. You can go to DMT specific experiences. Just start reading them. I did. And I found the DMT experiences literally gross compared to near death experiences. They were hallucinatory. Obviously, they were much more likely to be frightening. Events skipped around like a dream. If you know anything about near death, read 30 near death experiences and read 30 DMT experiences. And my gosh, see for yourself. They are substantially different. And then lastly, the third line of evidence, we do have a number of people that had near death experiences that also described using psychotropic drugs. Not a whole lot, but maybe, 15 or 20. So not a small number either. And for the substantial majority of those that had a near death experience and took a psychotropic drug, the significant majority of the time they point out how they were different. They point out that the near death experience seemed to be augmented, accelerated reality. Psychotropic drugs were hallucinatory and basically, pulling away from real reality. So again, with that as my perspective, it's kind of hard to go. But having said that, that's those are my three ways of looking at it. But I don't deny that yes, there are on podcasts and other actually published in scholarly peer-reviewed journals a lot of people that feel that way. Oh, and then last but not least, one of the most famous people to have a near-death experience, Eben Alexander, actually published his experience in a peer-reviewed scholarly literature as a test where he took DMT. And you can guess where this is going. He declared that the two experiences were nothing like each other, and the near death experience was real and the DMT was hallucinatory. And I might add, Eben, who's a friend of mine, actually happens to be, he previously worked as a Harvard neurosurgeon. So he knows his brain and he knows all about brain and pathology and near-death experience from his own experience. So again, I would encourage everybody to be damn careful about using something illegal where there's some pretty good reason to believe it's not going to reproduce a near-death experience that you might be interested in. If you're interested in near-death experiences, you read about them. You don't try to create them. Period.
Yeah, the conversation with Dr. Eben, we had him on the podcast, I think about 6-7 months ago. My God, also very fascinating conversation, just like this one.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised that the two of you are colleagues
Yeah.
and friends. Is what we're touching on here, because you were also runner up in the Bigelow competition for the essay, and you actually won a sizable amount of money there, $50,000. Is the essence of your submission kind of what we're discussing here today? What was the essence of that submission?
Oh yeah, you're nailing it here. This is good. You don't have to go read that 25,000 word essay. Save yourself. Yeah, it was in 2021. A billionaire named Bigelow put out a huge international contest for the best scientific essay for survival of consciousness after bodily death, or if you will, you could paraphrase that as life after death. So because the prize money was mammoth, over 1,000 people submitted their essays, and a panel of 6 very qualified judges reviewed over 200 of these essays. And then there were 3 sort of 1, 2, and 3 winners. And then there was the runner up group. And yay, I ended up in the runner up group. And you're right, I won $50,000. And by the way, I was going through my email and there's the subject line, you won $50,000. And I literally had my finger on the mouse ready to delete. Yeah, sure. And I said, wait a minute. And by some miracle, I didn't delete it. So I went on to win $50,000 because I didn't delete the notice that I'd won. But above and beyond that, there were 29 people, essays that were either first, second, third, or in the runner up group, or what they call a third group honorable mention. But interestingly, there was another major sort of paranormal scientific study of all 29 of those essays. So we had another very prominent paranormal researcher look at these 29 essays and pick out the ones that had the best scientific evidence for validating life after death. And yay, I was one of the top 6 that was selected in that too. So what you're hearing here, while it may sound remarkable, I want to emphasize it's been vetted by probably the sternest peer review imaginable out of that many judges who have that many essays that knew their stuff, and then again by another paranormal researcher. So while this may sound extraordinary, this is the facts. So by the toughest peer review vetting of just about any paper I've ever written.
And I do want to dive further into your medical work just shortly,
Oh,
but
okay.
just before we do, yeah, it's interesting because I want to talk about NDEs and just the transcultural nature of them, because you've got billionaires that are curious about it. I'm sure, I know, having researched you, that there have been, some people, in some very interesting places in society that have reached out to you for one-to-one
Mhm.
counsel and conversations about this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess a question would be cultural and religious variations in NDEs. So, how do NDEs vary across different cultures and religious backgrounds? Let's start there, but then we can
Yeah.
discuss some of the universalities, but also some of the bespoke
Yeah.
factors to them. Yeah.
Sure. As I mentioned, I have portions of the website translated into over 30 different languages, including a number of non Western civilization languages. So, as a result, we have been able to do by far the largest cross cultural study of near death experience that could ever be possible. It's ever been done. The website, which has over 4,000 near death experiences posted and is my research website, is nderf.org, standing for the Near Death Experience Research Foundation. That's where you can see, you can read, experiences for days. Again, these are first-person experiences, edited only for obvious grammar and spelling errors. So this is literally the first-person original descriptions of these amazing experiences
I'll put a link to
times
that in
thousands.
the show notes in the description of the video below for sure. Yep.
Good, good, good. I appreciate that because it is. There's really no substitute for either reading near-death experiences or heck, listening to podcasts exactly like what you're doing, where people can, hear about near-death experiences or people that personally experience them. That's why among many reasons why your podcast is so valuable. But getting back to cross-cultural near-death experiences, so as a result of that, we were able to get near death experience. We literally have hundreds and hundreds of experiences shared in non English languages. And we use human translators. We don't use, although the modern day Google or other translation engines are now way better than they were 10 or 20 years ago, we still use humans, volunteers. So, big shout out, thanks to my wife, Jody, who's webmaster and coordinated this amazing project, which I would have never had time to do. So, as a result of Jody's heroics, we now get hundreds and hundreds of non-English NDEs. They're human translated, and they're posted on the website. It is vividly obvious that they have the same elements, characteristics, that they are strikingly similar to all other English near-death experiences. But of course, as a researcher, someone who says, well, is there any cultural determination of the content? Well, that's a great research question. I agree. So I thought about that and I studied our non Western near death experiences, which we defined as near death experiences shared in countries that are not predominantly Judeo Christian. So, predominantly Muslim, Hindu, and Buddhist, a lot less likely Buddhist. But these are the real non Western nations that we have. And we now, and in fact, as part of the essay we talked about from Bix, I was able to analyze over 60 non Western near death experiences and compare their response to a very detailed survey of 34 questions about the content of the near death experience with all other Western near death experiences. And the bottom line is, once again, even though they're worlds apart, literally, the content is strikingly similar. They have the same elements, they have the same changes and values and beliefs afterwards. So, even after studying this now for decades, I am still amazed that it doesn't make any difference where on the planet you are. It doesn't make any difference whether you say a Muslim in Egypt or a Hindu in India or a Christian in the United States or an atheist anywhere, wherever on the planet you are, whatever your belief system was, what happens during a near death experience, strikingly similar worldwide.
Also, really interestingly, was because there's such an opportunity for adults to all collectively go through the journey of living and come up with a certain congealed set of beliefs amongst each other, and yet you've also studied child NDEs, and that is also
Yeah.
well, it's all fascinating. I don't know. I was like, that's also
Yes.
fascinating, but it's all fascinating. But that's also fascinating.
Well, I couldn't agree more. In fact, I found fascinating too, because I was very curious as a researcher. Well, what about very young children near death experiences? So the study group I studied was age 5 and younger. Median and mean age of this study group was 3.5 years old. I mean, that is dang young. At that young age, they almost certainly don't have well formed religious beliefs. They almost certainly don't understand
Goodness.
death. They almost certainly have not heard about near death experience. And yet, here are these people having their near death experience at that tender young age and sharing them. So, again, I compared the what occurs the 33 this study group was 33 characteristics in that version of the survey with older children and adult near death experiences. And once again, there was absolutely no statistical difference in their response to any of those survey questions. So, amazingly, when you have a near death experience as a child, what happens seems, again, at a minimum, you can say strikingly similar to what happens during older children and adults. As I've started to analyze a much larger data set, I think these very young children may be a little bit less likely to have a life review, but heck, is that a surprise? Well, probably not, because they don't have nearly as much life to review, and probably not as much, that they could have learned from their prior life. They haven't really fully developed as people to the point that they can as easily make free will choices or be responsible for how they've lived their life. So that's, once again, absolutely amazing. Young children, old children, adults, what happens during a near death experience, remarkably similar.
The life review is pretty trippy. It's not. It doesn't take 80 years to review an 80-year life.
Yeah. Not in earthly, and I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, I mean, here we are talking about reviewing all of their prior life, and these people have lived their earthly life for decades. So here, all at once, you're saying, "Well, wait a minute, Doctor Long, are you telling me that they reviewed all of their prior life, as in ALL, all of their prior life for, even though they lived for decades, and yet, obviously, during their near-death experience, they're unconscious or clinically dead, more often in minutes, usually, not much longer than that." Some people may be unconscious or comatose for a while, but you're talking, minutes to typically under an hour, and here they are reviewing decades of their life. Answer: absolutely. That's exactly what they're describing. And again, this is not rare. We've got hundreds of these types of all prior life review. And it's just a dramatic example of how rapidly consciousness can proceed during near death experiences. One of the more common scenarios of a life review is described as, we hear this probably more often than other ways it's being described, are like screens on a wall, many, many different screens. They can see different aspects of their life. Typically, moving forward, they can focus on a particular screen and review a particular part of their life. Or at other times, they just simply are aware, as in reliving all of their prior life. So, yeah, that just is one of the real dramatic, fascinating things. And may I add, while we're on the topic, as a researcher, I thought this is amazing. Is it possible during their life review that they saw something of their prior life, like say when they were a toddler, very early in childhood, that they'd forgotten, that didn't really happen? So I checked that out with over 80. Many years ago, I did this research, and at that time we looked at over 80 near-death experiences, and I wanted to see if there was anything that they described in their life review that was unreal by their assessment or my assessment. And the answer is no. We call it perfect playback. What they saw, even on it's uncommon, but in the near-death experiencers that did see something when they were a toddler, something that would be memorable, they got hurt, something serious happened. Even if they'd forgotten about it, if they checked it out with their parents later, boom, yeah, that really happened. It's virtually unheard. It's essentially unheard of that there would be anything they saw in a life review that didn't actually happen, even if they'd long forgotten about it.
It really opens up all the tendrils of reincarnation now at this point. How do I
Yeah,
not
it
ask a
really does.
question about that?
Well,
So,
yeah.
yes, because some people believe in it, some people don't.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's this idea of, even if we scratch the surface a little bit, like old souls, new souls,
Mhm.
different ideas in there. And so, yeah, do these NDEs offer insights into reincarnation, soul evolution, and yeah, how different people
Yeah.
experience life differently, even.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I will fully admit this. When I started my near death experience research, I thought reincarnation was ridiculous. I said, no way, no how, there's no mechanism by that could happen. But I'm a scientist, and my beliefs are guided and formed by evidence. That's what I do for a living as a physician and as a near death experience researcher. So I will tell you now, we have overwhelming evidence for the reality of near death experience. We have hundreds and hundreds of people that had a near death experience that were aware during their near death experience that they had prior lives. They can recall either flashes or portions of it, typically not in great detail, but they are very aware that they had prior, typically, the great majority are earthly lives. Uncommon to rarely, they may recall prior life existences in some non-earthly realm that yet seem to be physical realm. So we ask some very direct questions, not using the word reincarnation, but sort of getting around that indirectly, and that's led many people to be very clear about that. And yet, and that's fascinating. And often they can be aware of or recall multiple prior earthly lives. So I still don't have that figured out. I will tell you, among physical earthly beings, Homo sapiens, that's who we all are, genus and species. On Earth, there's been about 100 billion people that lived from, the earliest cavemen and the dawn of our species. There's only, several billion alive here today. So, I don't know how everybody could have historically lots and lots of reincarnations. I mean, how there's your pool. So I don't of 100 billion, but I don't get it. So all I do know, and I think one thing that's helped me to conceptualize the overwhelming evidence for the reality of reincarnation is if you really, really deep down believe, as I do, that we live in a universe of infinite possibilities and potential, then reincarnation is just simply one more potential, one more possibility that in such a universe must exist. So that's another sort of philosophical way to do it. But if you go and read near death experiences or use the search function actually on the top right and search for the term reincarnation, wow, you want to sit there and read all night some discussions of near death experiencers about reincarnation, there it is. And again, over and over, we hear they didn't believe in reincarnation. It's only after they were aware of it. I mean, these aren't people that said, I believe in reincarnation, so that must be why I became aware. No, these are like typical, the average, if you do surveys of typical, at least Americans, it's only about, at most 20-25% believe in reincarnation. And yet in near death experiencers, ultimately from surveys, the percentage is not surprisingly much higher. Again, because they learned during their near death experience that's what happens.
The engineer in me can't help but ask this question, and pardon me if it's not been fleshed out, but it makes me wonder about you going through these experiences and you can remember past life experiences potentially, and it just makes me wonder, like, because it's like a memory, but when you're in that, like, the universal knowledge information transfer and your
Mhm.
experience with it is very, it's incredibly different.
Yeah,
But it makes me wonder what the memories are tethered to. Like,
yeah.
is that kind of soul or consciousness in your mind? Like, what have you thought about that, Touchwood?
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, I have thought about that. So, good question. We're getting back to that life review where they may encounter all of their prior life. Many near death experiencers have what's called a panoramic life review, where they're not only aware of their prior life, but for all people that they interacted with, they become aware of what the other person was thinking, and how they felt based on that interaction. And often it's a surprise. It's not what they would have known in their earthly life, and yet they become aware of that. So there's uh, tons of evidence in near death experiences that our who we are, our consciousness, ourselves, our memories are permanent, are eternal. I mean, does that surprise anyone? Well, of course not. Your eternal souls before we came here, your eternal souls later. This is a part of our soul journey. So, not a huge surprise to me and grounded in a lot of evidence in near death experience. There seems to be that universal consciousness that's retained. And so, not surprising to me with life, with reincarnation remembrance, that they're literally vividly reliving that prior life. And it can be, again, usually brief, but it can be long. And it's amazing to me. It doesn't make it, they can, if they're male in this life, they might have been a male or female in their prior life. The great majority of these, they live just simple, mundane existences in their prior life remembrances. We don't have any Cleopatras from the prior life remembrance. It doesn't surprise me, but these are, just people, and some of it is just vividly realistic. For example, we had a person living in a walled city in medieval times. And if you have that Disney perspective that the medieval times are castles with tall spires and white knights running around, forget it. Here was the reality, what happened then and what they described. These cities were walled in because it kept people alive from invaders and criminals. And these walled cities were, they were gross. They were muddy. They stunk. There was disease. Derelicts were not unusual. There would be hunger in there. and you would literally risk your life if you traveled too far. So a gripping example of a reincarnation memory that is very much in alignment with what we know historically to be the truth about life in that very often brutal, difficult era.
It's interesting at this juncture, it's hard not to dive into ancient cultures and their relationship with the afterlife. When you look at like Egyptians in
Mhm.
particular, I think that's probably the most commonly sort of versed in the zeitgeist, like building these incredible, well, now the debate's on in terms of whether these are actually tombs or not. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, you're watching mummies and people being embalmed and like, putting all their earthly riches in a tomb with them to carry into the afterlife. Yeah, it's so fascinating thinking about what people knew potentially about the afterlife that may have been lost through generations of just knowledge transfer and wisdom transfer through the ages. Have you researched stuff like that?
No, I am fascinated by ancient Egypt. I actually visited a reproduction of the tomb they found of King Tut, and it just blew me away how elaborate and detailed. I mean, and gold everywhere. I mean, it was just off the scale, amazing. I'm going to come at it from my perspective on all this. I think you have to have some respect for how we've developed as humankind in a few thousand years. Back in that era, they thought if you were going to have an afterlife, you had to be mummified and you had to go through the rituals. We know that's crap now. We know that's the future for all of us to have an afterlife. And so I don't think we needed those rituals, the priest chanting, the stuff that you had to do or not do during this, and and have all the other beings, or statues be with you to be servants in the afterlife. So I would have to say I'm far more studying, ancient Egypt, and fascinated as I am. I'm far more respectful of where we are as a society and understanding today. I think we have evolved in a very positive direction in our spiritual growth, and we don't think that the afterlife is just for the very extremely few wealthy that can afford to be involved and go through their incredibly expensive rituals. We now believe the afterlife is the heritage and the destiny for each and every one of us. So I think we're probably far more wise in a lot of ways than any historical time in the past, where they didn't have the benefit of understanding near death experiences or the writings of the great sages, the philosophers, or religions, the great religions, all that has sort of informed our understanding of spirituality today. I mean, it's interesting to speculate. If they had some great wisdom back in the Egyptian times or other ancient things, that's yet another very important reason to study what they wrote and to try to understand. Because I mean, all people in all times and all religions, I firmly believe their spiritual paths were important and significant, and there's some nugget of wisdom and information we can learn from that heritage in
Mm.
all prior ancient civilizations. But I think we can also be proud of where we're at now. Hooray!
Yeah, it's really interesting actually. I couldn't help but contemplate just, and this is going to sound somewhat rude, but pardon me for that part of it. Like the to have been a pharaoh must have been quite consuming for one's ego if they were human. I don't know. There's so many speculative spaces in these. But if they were simply human, then it would have been such a place to be egoically, that
Mhm.
also like surrendering your concept of life to like, oh sure, and like the ego must be so tethered, to like, and then like you could sort of
Yeah,
see that like, oh yeah, believing in this afterlife, and then also untethering myself and like sort of packing in all these riches for your afterlife. So it's like, okay, cool, this is like
yeah,
a balm for that seismic ego potentially. And I
yeah.
don't want to say like pharaohs were egoic because I don't know, right? But there's I couldn't help but sort of just reflect on that at this particular juncture in the conversation.
Sure. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's again, it's just fascinating. What to keep learning what we can about those ancient civilizations. I mean, the pharaohs. Geez, they were. I mean, they told the people that they were gods, literally. That's a pretty heavy kind of ego thing to carry, that they're gods. I wonder if they believed they were gods, or if they tried to raise their scepter by just using their hand or a mind. They probably would have learned early in life, gosh, I can't do that. So it'd be interesting to well, we're in the afterlife. All of us can ask them because they'll be there too.
Yeah.
We'll have a lot of those. burning questions that might not be so burning in the afterlife. But yeah, I'm
Well,
damn curious too. That's a good idea.
because that's one of the other points of data from your research as well. This universal knowledge piece, this divine revelation that happens on the other side.
Yeah.
People just seem to know so much. And in fact, when you ask them questions about, can you describe everything you knew? I'm hoping you'll share the metaphor of the ocean and the teacup, please.
Oh, sure, I'll do that. Yeah, that was at the very dawn of being a near-death experience researcher. I was very aware that many people that had a near-death experience were aware in the afterlife of universal knowledge, and they said I knew everything, math, science, how everything fit together, and it bugged the heck out of me because they would say, "Why, it's so simple," and I, what? And then they'd go on, and so that was took some time for me to get over. But above and beyond that, I kept saying, okay, we'll bring back something that we can use in our earthly life, some kind of insight, scientific development, knowledge that will inform us and help us to accelerate our growth, scientifically here as an earthly being. If you know everything and you've got universal knowledge, bring it back. And over and over again, it used to just make me nuts in my very beginning of research. No one would do that. And then you're right. That was the one thing I finally was educated by a near death experiencer who said, yeah, I had the universal knowledge in the afterlife, but when I came back, I could not retain that universal knowledge because it's like trying to put an ocean of knowledge into the teacup of our human brain. And then it clicked, and I went, oh, okay, yeah, that's I just learned something else here today. I get it, because again, you're talking about something non-physical, eternal, infinite, and here we are with remarkably finite physical structured brains, and so it's like I get it. And also, there's probably rules that you can't really bring back something that would sort of bypass free will. We have to go through as a humankind and develop our what we do and learn and grow collectively as well as individually.
Hi there, guys. I wanted to take a quick moment just to introduce you to my one-to-one coaching. It's something that I deeply love doing. As you can tell, conscious conversation is such a massive part of my life. And having one-to-one, deep, meaningful conversations with people where I get to show up as your brother or as the coach or as your mentor has been such a gift for me personally, and a gift for lots of the people that I have supported on the journey of living a more spiritually empowered, spiritually powered, spiritually aligned life. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's some examples of people all around the world that have experienced profound transformations through this coaching experience.
Amrit is a fantastic coach.
In a few sessions, he got to a depth that I'd only experienced before working with certain medicines. And
He's gone through a lot of the struggles that you're probably facing, and Amrit's been a really strong, supportive figure in my journey.
In control of myself.
I'm kinder to myself.
I actually have that vision and a purpose.
I do feel like I'm a better version of myself already.
Amazing energy.
He was easy to talk to, which made me easy to trust him.
Working with Amrit at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and really I was bouncing out of bed.
Whenever I get off the calls with Amrit, best money we've ever spent.
I would not recommend him because I don't want everyone to know about him, and then I won't be able to book him. If he gets too busy, I won't get my turn.
I would say absolutely.
There's no way you can work with Amrit for a period of time without being transformed.
So if you're considering him as a coach, do not hesitate, because you won't be disappointed.
Alrighty, so hopefully that's inspiring your evolution onwards and upwards. And if you are so inspired to evolve, you can book in a one-to-one call with me directly at www.amrit.coach/life. And guys, if I can say so myself, I do think this is something quite special. Most people that I see building things online don't really work with people this deeply, this intimately, one-on-one as things start to grow, just because it is so time intensive. And yet I'm so deeply passionate about the transformation that comes from one-to-one coaching that just isn't available anywhere else. It would be my absolute honor and a pleasure to support your spiritual awakening, your spiritual path, your spiritual unfoldment. It is my life's work. I look forward to seeing you in the call. Back to today's podcast. By day, you actually help a lot of people with, a significant portion of your patients are going through, they're struggling with some terminal stuff. I'd love to sort of draw a bridge now between your research here and also your work day to day. How does being a medical practitioner and then carrying all this in your awareness that we've just discussed and then some.
Yeah.
I'm conscious that even this podcast is a teacup relative to the ocean that you're carrying, touch wood.
Yeah. Gotcha. Oh, that's great. I love that. I love that. I'm a practicing full-time physician. My medical specialty is radiation oncology, which is the use of radiation to treat cancer. And so, yeah, as you say, I deal with a lot of people that have life-threatening events, cancer, or some people that have terminal disease, and we're simply trying to make them comfortable the remaining months of their life. So it's something that's been an everyday part of my professional medical practice. Now, I'm very cautious about bringing up my near death experience work. People have to know about me, which isn't hard. Heck, go Google Dr. Jeffrey Long.
Or just
And,
Google NDE and Dr. Jeffrey Long does both.
that too. So I'm easy to find, and so there is a number of people, and they're either the actual patients themselves or family members. They Google it and they go, "Oh my gosh, look at this!" So any patient that wants to discuss that leads to a fascinating discussion. And I've had a few patients that had near-death experiences or family members. So again, long discussion about that. I stock my books at work, so if they bring that up and they're especially interested in that, I always sign a book and give it to them. And I want to try to reinforce that discussion. It's really a very special way that I can be a doctor to these people and talk about that. And yeah, it's profoundly reassuring to these people that have that life-threatening illness, cancer, that they can talk with a doctor, they can share their near-death experience or their belief in that with a doctor, and then they get a free book, yay, and can learn a lot more about that. I know it's helped a lot of my patients and their family members in terms of having sort of further insight and awareness in the overwhelming scientific evidence for the reality of life after death. I know that's helped a lot of people be at peace.
Because I had a beautiful gentleman on the podcast, Stephen Jenkinson, not too long ago. I'm not sure if you've come across his work. He wrote a book called Die Wise, and he's spent a lot of time and energy into this space of hospice care. Yeah. What do you believe the future of hospice care can look like? Because I'm sure not everybody is actually carrying the awareness that you're carrying in around the spaces that you're walking around.
Yeah. I will tell you, I've been practicing. Boy, when me feel old now, watch this. I've been practicing 38 years for medicine. And so, yeah, true story. I have, from the beginning, there was no hospice 38 years ago. And I have watched in amazement as hospice has developed to become far more sophisticated. And in this day and age, when we have a lot of cancer patients go on hospice when they have a very brief time to live, and it is amazing to me in this day and age how the science of hospice has helped people amazingly. They're helping more people die in relative comfort, dignity, and free of a lot of symptoms now than was ever possible before. So again, a huge shout out to hospice and the hospice workers. They make a mammoth difference. And I've seen that progress over the decades I've been a doctor, and it's really been impressive. Oh, I think again, for people that are on hospice, I mean, you could just imagine. I hope as many as possible are interested and willing to see this very podcast or other podcasts you've done because they're incredibly reassuring. People that are really wrestling with that in their final days, weeks, months of life, if they have that, we talked about fear. I mean, you can just imagine they got death looking them in the eye, imminent death. So that's why this is such important info. Well, one of the reasons why this is such important information. It helps people to understand that yes, death isn't the end. We have a mountain of evidence to prove that. You will be reunited with your loved ones when you pass on. Your loved ones will be reunited with you, and that it may not diminish the grief of loss, and it won't much probably, but ultimately, that reassurance, that deep down knowing confidence that death isn't the end, that this is just a very tiniest slice of our real eternal existence, is going to be profoundly important and reassuring in helping people in those final days, weeks, months of their life and their friends, family, and loved ones around them at that very difficult time.
Dr. Jeffrey, you mentioned your books. Can you share a little bit around the two different books? Both incredibly incredible. I really loved the second one because of the
Oh,
nature that
okay.
it unpacks as well. But
Yeah.
yeah, if you can share
I
your
like
two
the second
books.
one too. So great
Yeah,
minds think alike. If I might flatter myself. Yeah,
touch wood.
God in the Afterlife, the groundbreaking new evidence for the reality of God and near death experiences. That was, we had like 270 odd people that had a near death experience and were aware of or encountered God. And I was just absolutely amazed. It's sort of like the first book I did over and over as I did the research to try to look for similarities or dissimilarities. And I was just blown away at how often people were aware of or encountered God and the striking similarities. I mean, hear this over and over was something outside of what you would believe for culture. They were not being judged. This was not a fearful experience. This was an encounter of the most joyous, uh, beautiful, um, profoundly wise, been called a creator, and then the number one term, love, and being loved for who they are and everything they are. I mean, wow, how it doesn't get much more reassuring
It's
than
like a
that.
homecoming.
I mean, good God, you can sit here and read about how God loves his people, and that's a phrase, but wow, to read some of these accounts. If you have any doubts, anybody, hey, if you ever, any of you that are watching this podcast have any doubt about God's love for you, go to the nderf.org website and pull down the menu that says exceptional experiences and just pull out a few near death experiences. And I mean, a minority of near death experiences do describe an encounter or awareness with God, but you will find them. And over, you're going to see exactly what I see, different people, different language describing it, and yet overwhelmingly converging on that beautiful, wondrous God that we have that is in the afterlife and is a very powerfully important positive of our eternal existence. So, very profoundly reassuring.
And the first book, if you can just share a little bit around that one as well. I'll put both links to both
Sure.
in the show notes below.
Yeah, that was Evidence of the Afterlife, the Science of Near Death Experiences. I was approached by the publisher without me interested in writing a book. And one thing led to another. And I said, look, I'm a doctor, I'm busy. And I ended up doing it. I had no idea it was going to go anywhere. But 8 days after it was published, it became a New York Times bestseller. And I'll admit it, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what it would mean to be a New York Times bestseller. So I got the call and it was on the list. And I just said, well, I think that's real good. And then my life changed because then up until that time, this is interesting. I mean, it was well over a decade. I worked anonymously on the website, that ndrf.org website. I was Dr. Jeff because I didn't want it to offend any doctors. I didn't want to, be an issue. I mean, I just said, I'm just going to work anonymously because I don't know how my colleagues in the medical profession will accept it. Well, you can't do that after you have a New York Times best-selling book. So I talked to about every community group and a number of doctors groups. I was astounded at how well it was received. I mean, these are people, especially that know science, know how strong the science is in that book. So, and then I started doing podcasts like this. Yeah, I'd never hardly done that before. So this was really quite a positive experience. It completely changed my life. And it's really been a huge blessing to me over decades now to have shared that with literally tens of millions of people. It is such important information. It's kept me phenomenally busy to be a doctor and do this research and share this, but I wouldn't miss it for the world. I mean, it's one of the great blessings of my life to continue to receive these amazing near death experiences. I still value and respect each and every one of them. I'm still learning. I'm still very much a student. And in fact, I would emphasize what we don't know about near death experiences exceeds what we do know. So we're literally all pioneers, continuing to learn those deeper messages, the profoundly positive messages. And it's my honor and privilege as I learn that to share it with humanity.
I have to ask you, Dr. Jeffrey Long, how has your relationship with death, has studying all
Yeah,
these NDEs shifted, changed, been affected?
right. I think I'm like about everybody. I sure don't look forward to the dying process. That's rough. A lot less now with hospice, I would say, a lot less with modern medicine. Oh my gosh. I mean, in the decades I've been a doctor, it has revolutionized how much better that is. And yet, with death, there's still that. And I've lost loved ones, including very recently. And it's very difficult. You still have that grieving process, even though I am profoundly aware that there is an afterlife and a wonderful afterlife. That does not pull back from the issue that one that you loved is gone. And that's difficult. Yeah, I mean, there's going to be sadness, there's going to be grief, and it's just going to take time. And I think that's true for the great majority of people, even people who've had near death experiences. So that none of that really mitigates the reality of this earthly life and the difficulties we face here. Now, in the long run, having that profound understanding that there really is for all souls life after death, we really all will be together in eternal paradise. Yeah, I mean, that really helps in the long run adjustment and awareness. and, if you will, the coping with grief to go on and continue to live my life, be a doctor, and do it with a smile, and put some of that grief behind me, allowing me to be everything I can for my patients and the near-death experience research I do quite regularly.
Thank you so much for sharing that. At the risk
Mhm.
of being cheeky, I do have a 3-year-old though, so you won't be mummified. You're not
That's great. Oh, I love it.
gonna.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Well, that's fun. You just never know what young kids will say. No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. I love it.
Do
That's
you reckon so, for yourself, cremation, burial?
Oh, good. Oh, hell, I'll probably get buried just because that's what everybody else in my family did. But I
Yeah.
don't, heck, when you die, I totally understand your physical, remnant is a shell. It's not you. It was you, but all of a sudden, when that soul departs, boom, it's not you. And so then, it's really, I think, as much as anything, for the comfort of the other living people, that it's a loss. So if they'd be more comfortable with cremation, I'd say, hell, fire up the burners. They'd be more comfortable burial, a traditional burial and a headstone, go right ahead.
Mm.
So I'm easy on that, knowing that our real reality, who we really are when we die, will be a non-physical existence in an afterlife.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's a big part of Dr. Stephen Jenkinson's work, who I referenced earlier. He said your death actually doesn't belong to you; it belongs
Yeah.
to the people around you and your loved ones. And actually, it's the last. He's cautious to use the word heroic, but it's the last heroic act you really have. Is that how you deal with that final frontier, and is actually how
Yeah.
your generations to come will also learn to deal with that final frontier. And yeah, there's even like talks recently, like people have, I don't know if you've seen these, but there's like tree pods. People take their ashes of their loved ones and actually grow them in the roots of trees. And there's lots of
Oh,
innovative
that's
things,
That's
beautiful
beau
things that are
that's
emerging.
beautiful. Yeah, that's very profound wisdom. That I love that your death is really your last heroic act, and it's for the living. I mean, great wisdom in that.
Mm. Dr. Jeffrey Long.
Yes.
Wow. I want to thank you for today's, and I will thank you for today's conversation. I'm
Yeah,
so grateful for the abundance with which you've shared yourself here
yeah.
today. And yet, as you've mentioned, 38 years of being a medical practitioner, 30 years of research, your wife's toil and labor. She almost basically gave up a career in her own right to help you
She did.
get this
Yes, she
information
did.
out to the world, translated to 30.
Yes.
Your life's work, man, this conversation stands on the shoulders of all of that. So, yes, absolutely. Thank you for your time and energy here today. But also, oh, brother, thank you so much for who you are and the work you've done in the world, and
Oh,
just you doing you and following your curiosities and tapping such a rich vein that is so supportive for so many people at such
mm,
challenging junctures of their life, and such deep curiosities and inspirations for people to live such rich lives.
mm.
So just really want to honor, acknowledge you. Thank you so much. Mm.
Oh, and thank you. I really big thanks for those very kind and thoughtful words. Huge thanks to you two for such a spectacular discussion we had here today. Oh, I love it. This was a great one, everybody, and what you do too. I mean, we're all on the same page here. We're all bringing forward to the world in different ways, in different times, and in different modalities, the same message that that spirituality is important, that's all of us, and this is, I think, the messages we collectively are bringing forward about the reality of life after death is probably the most profoundly positive message for all of humanity that is even conceivable.
Links to everything that we've discussed in the show notes below. There is so much underlying this podcast, and you guys can go research all of that in your own right as well. And I'll put all that in the show notes below. Dr. Jeffrey Long, thank you so much again.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much. God, what an awesome interview. This is going to be, oh, I'm looking forward to this one. Wow. Geez. This was so cool. It's really, I mean, you're so much on the same page here. And it's just like, people will think this was choreographed. No, this was just a discussion here. That's why this was so cool. Well, I really,
Oh,
God, this is so awesome. Talk about a home run. I'm looking
oh,
forward to this one.
my
So
goodness.
cool.
Thank you so much. That
So
means so much to me.
so
Ooh.
much wisdom and insight, and just so much we just covered so much profound good material here. It was just amazing.
Alrighty, guys. I couldn't help but, just the topics of conversation that we were floating through, and yeah, just the conversations we were having, I couldn't help but reflect on. It's a poem, it's a short story by Andy Weir called "The Egg," and I just wanted to share that all with you guys. It is a bit of a short read, so feel free to skip ahead if you feel so called. But yeah, it's well, I would almost say inarguably. Oh no, the writings of Rumi and Khalil Gibran are right up there for me. It's arguably one of my favorite pieces of short literature, and it's called "The Egg" by Andy Weir. You were on your way home when you died. It was a car accident. Nothing particularly remarkable, but fatal nonetheless. You left behind a wife and 2 children. It was a painless death. The AMTs, they tried their best to save your life, but unfortunately to no avail. Your body was just so utterly shattered that you were better off. Trust me. And that's when you met me. What happened? You asked. Where am I? You died, I said matter-of-factly. No point in mincing words, especially at this point. There was a truck and it was skidding? Yeah, I said. I died? Yeah, but don't feel bad about it. Everyone dies, I said. You looked around me and there was nothingness. Just you and me. What is this place? You asked. Is this the afterlife? More or less, I said. Are you God? You asked. Yeah, I replied. I'm God. My kids? My wife? You said. What about them? I asked. Will they be all right? That's what I like to see, I said. You just died and your main concern is for your family. That's real good stuff right there. You looked at me with fascination. To you, I didn't look like God. I just looked like some man or possibly a woman, some vague authority figure maybe, more of a grammar school teacher than the Almighty. Don't worry, I said. They'll be fine. Your kids will remember you as perfect in every way. They didn't have time to grow contempt for you. Your wife will cry on the outside, but will be secretly relieved. To be fair, your marriage was falling apart. If it's any consolation, she is going to feel very guilty for feeling so relieved. Oh, you said. So what happens now? Do I go to heaven or hell or something? Neither, I said. You'll be reincarnated. Ah, so the Hindus were right. All religions are right in their own way, I said. Walk with me. You followed along as we strode through the void. Where are we going? Nowhere in particular, I said. It's just nice to walk while we talk. So what's the point then, you asked? Will I get reborn? Will I just be a blank slate? Will I be a baby? All my experiences and everything I did in this life, they don't matter? Huh. Not so, I said. You have within you all the knowledge and experiences of all your past lives. You just don't remember them right now. I stopped walking and took you by the shoulders. Your soul is more magnificent and beautiful and gigantic than you can possibly imagine. A human mind can only contain a tiny fraction of what you really are. It's like sticking your finger in a glass of water to see if it's hot or cold. You put a tiny part of yourself into the vessel, and when you bring it back out, you've gained all the experiences it has had. You've been in a human for the last 48 years, so you haven't stretched out and felt the rest of your immense consciousness. If we hung out here long enough, you'd start remembering everything, but there's no point doing that between each life. How many times have I been reincarnated then? Oh, lots and lots and lots and lots, and in lots of different lives. In fact, this time round, you'll be a Chinese peasant girl in 540 AD. Wait, what? You stammered? You're sending me back in time? Yeah, well, I guess technically, time as you know it only really exists in your universe. Things are different where I come from. Where you come from? Oh, sure, I explained. I come from somewhere else, and there are others like me. I know you want to know what it's like there, but honestly, you really wouldn't understand. Oh, you said, a little let down. But wait, if I get reincarnated to other places in time, I could have interacted with myself at some point, couldn't have I? Sure, happens all the time. And with both lives only aware of their own lifespan, you don't even know that it's happening. Well, what's the point of all of that? What's the point of it all? Seriously? I asked. Seriously, you're asking me for the meaning of life. Isn't that a little stereotypical? Well, it's a reasonable question, though, you persisted. I looked you in the eye. The meaning of life, the reason I made this whole universe, is for you to mature. Whoa, you mean mankind. You want us to mature. No. Just you. I made this whole universe for you. With each new life, you grow and mature and become a larger and greater intellect. Just me. What about everyone else? There is no one else, I said. In this universe, there's just you and me. You stared blankly at me. But all the people on Earth, all you, different incarnations of you. Wait, I'm everyone? Haha, now you're getting it, I said with a congratulatory slap on the back. I'm every human being who's ever lived, or will ever live, yeah. I'm Abraham Lincoln, and you're John Wilkes Booth too, I added. I'm Hitler, you said appalled, and you're the millions he killed. I'm Jesus, and you're everyone who's ever followed him. You fell silent. Every time you victimize someone, I said, you were victimizing yourself. Every act of kindness you've done to yourself. Every happy and sad moment ever experienced by any human was or ever will be experienced by you. You thought for a long time. Why? You asked. Why do all of this? Because someday you will become like me. Because that's what you are. You're one of my kind. You're my child. Whoa, you said, incredulous. You mean I'm a god? No, not yet. You're a fetus. You're still growing. But once you've lived every human life throughout all of time, you will have grown enough to finally be born. So the whole universe, you said, it's just an egg, I answered. And now it's time for you to move on to your next life. And I sent you on your way. You, inspired soul, you made it through to the end of another incredible episode. Dr. Jeffrey Long, my goodness. Now, I just want to take a quick moment out to thank all of you that once again are subscribed to the channel. Thank you so much. Everything you see around here is powered and empowered by your subscription to the channel. Thank you so much for your incredible love and support. And to all of you that are considering subscribing, as I'm saying the word subscribe, the bell notification and the button below are lighting up. Please hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon. It helps with everything we're doing here, promoting this kind of wisdom and prosperity and spirituality around the world. Thanks to you, basically, hitting subscribe and championing all this on. Thank you so much for doing so. Now, in today's episode, we discussed Dr. Eben Alexander, who is arguably one of the world's most famous NDEs and a neurosurgeon. We had a really incredible podcast with him on the Inspired Evolution podcast. If you want to dive into that, you can click here in just a moment. And then also to go further, we had an incredible conversation with Dr. Stephen Jenkinson on how to die wise. We'll put that video just here as well. And then in order to continue your Inspired Evolution journey, the algorithm is YouTube is going to basically find the video that is best suited to you as well and pop that just here for you. So pick any of those to continue your evolution, your inspirations further into this incredible subject matter. And I will see you in the next episode. As always, thank you for your blessings. See you in the next one.